Hello everybody, welcome back to another session by K21Academy, and today our expert trainer will be discussing about Kubernetes Secrets. So make sure you're watching the video till the end.
So there are some sensitive information what we have. Like, for example, I have a couple of microservices and say maybe I have a web UI which is acting as a front end for me, which needs to talk to my database. All right. And what does it need? To talk to my database, it needs to have my database connection string, which consists of my user ID, it consists of my password, it consists of maybe which DB name, some sensitive information. Of course, for me to talk to my database, I need to configure my front end to talk to my backend, my database, to connect to which database, what is the name, where is it running, what credentials do I make use of. I need to specify these connection details, and that's when I can make a connection after authenticate with my database out there, right? And there are a couple of places where we can mention that and we can connect to it. One is I can write this connection string in the code what I'm writing. In the code, I can hard code that connection string as a plain text, or we're containerizing the same application. Maybe, I can put this connection string as part of my image, maybe as environment variables, where I can hard code this. Or maybe when I write my manifest files, YAML or JSON files, I can specify the environment variable values in the YAML file. The problem with all of these three methods is we are exposing our credentials in plain text. Anybody who has access to my code right now, my GitHub, wherever I'm storing my code, knows what the connection string is, right? If I set that as an image, whoever can inspect my image can know what it is. If I put it in the manifest files, in my YAML files, and check in those YAML files in my source control, anybody with access to those YAML manifest files can also read that sensitive information as plain text from these YAML or JSON manifest files. What do we do then? This information is needed from one service to another service to talk to. When I say service, not the Kubernetes service, the microservice, right? To connect, it needs those strings and it needs that sensitive information. And if you put it out there in the plain text format, either in your code or your image or your YAML files, anybody with access to those can read it. So we want to safeguard what our credentials are. What can we do? Kubernetes offers you an API or resource called as secrets. What it does, you have your passwords, or your tokens, or your keys, your private keys, your SSH keys, some sensitive information which needs to be stored separately from your environment variables or your configuration, which can be created beforehand, some sensitive information stored in your etcd and made available to that particular pod which needs it during the runtime. That's what secrets are. Has to be less than 1 MB in size, typically made use for your sensitive informations like your password, your tokens, and keys. Let me show you one example which we looked at in Docker Compose. If I bring out and if we go to hub.docker.com, one of the example we looked at when we were doing Docker Compose, we looked at one of the most popular Ghost blog application out there. Right, this is what we looked at, a free and open source blogging platform. Scroll down a little bit. It tells you, it's made up of two different services. You have a Ghost UI, and then you have a MySQL DB running out there. Together is that your Ghost application will be out there. We took this example for deploying it on our Docker Swarm using Docker Stack or Docker Compose using the standalone Docker. If I convert the same thing to the YAML file, more or less the same thing in the Kubernetes YAML file as well. If you pay attention and look at it here, the Ghost blog, what we have here, it needs to talk to the MySQL DB. And for it to do so, it needs the host of the database, the name of the database, as which user are you connecting, what password are you making use of. This was put into the YAML manifest file out there. They could have taken this, put it as part of your image, what they're building as well, as environment variable. Of course it is, and this is what you're overriding it. Or you could have built it into the code. But either ways, like we discussed, this would have been in plain text. Anybody with access to that could read it. So the solution, Kubernetes offers you something called a secret. You can make use of that, save and protect that sensitive information. But what we realize here, the ghost blog, if it needs to talk to the DB, it needs those connection strings. There's no escape from that. So instead of leaving it out in the plain text where everybody can see, we take the sensitive information, we create them as an API resource called a secret, which is stored in your HCD. And when you write your manifest files, you don't have to write your key and value pairs, the environment variables in plain text. Instead, what you can do, you can write the keys, but the value for them, you can reference it to the secret. So whoever reads the YAML file will not make out what your password is. But when you deploy that secret is already created, stored, and made available in HCD. API server takes that information, passes it on to the kubelet, whichever kubelet needs it, and that is passed on. And when the container is creation as an environment variable, that's what secrets are. Just gave you a little bit of overview summary. Let's go take a look at that in the working, where we get better understanding. Let me increase the font size a tad, little bit, so you guys can see it better. Kubectl, create me the secret, and I'm going to ask for help. It says there are 3 types of secrets what you can create. The first one is Docker registry, generic, as in any information you want to create. Then there is TLS type of secret. Okay, what is the Docker registry secret? Now think about this. Here is the story. I have 100 nodes in my cluster, and I need to pull images, private images. What were we doing so far? I was making use of some images what I had in my publicly available repositories. We looked at Docker Hub. We never had to authenticate. But if there's an image out there in a private repository, coming from whichever registry, we've been looking at Docker Hub by default, whatever registry it is. And if it's a private repository out there, what's going to happen? When you try to pull the image, what's going to do? That Docker is going to come back and complain, hey, listen, I can't pull this image because this is private. You need to authenticate. And how did we authenticate so far? And if you did Docker info, it showed you were logged in as what user, right? And right now, it doesn't show me anything right now. The reason for that is we are right now using our Docker as anonymous. I'm just making use of Docker as an example, just so that you guys can relate to it, right? It can be any container runtime, anything, that's fine. But the point I'm trying to make is, right now, my Docker is the user which is accessing the Docker Hub is anonymous, right? So if I want to pull a private image, it's not going to pull. So what did we do? We had to do Docker login. Of course, when we looked at the Docker login and help, we could specify which server we want to connect to. If not, default is what's defined by your daemon. That's a Docker Hub in our case, right? So if I just do Docker login, it's going to ask me my Docker Hub ID. That is Rohan K21. Go through. It's been a while. Come on. Cool. It says login succeeded right now. And what did it tell me? It told me, listen, your password is stored in a config.json file, unencrypted. Yep. So next time Docker daemon needs to go fetch authenticate, it's going to look at this file. It's going to authenticate. Similar to what? Your .cube/config file we saw, or .aws file when you configure your AWS CLI, .azure file folder, right? Similar story. Under whichever the home directory, whichever the user I was, a hidden folder called Docker and the config.json file. Now, if I go back and show you this file of mine, I'm going to show you and move away from there real quick. This is my credentials, my user ID and my password in the base64 encoded format. That's what Docker daemon is going to look at, and it's going to authenticate with your Docker. So if you go back and do Docker info, now we see we're no longer an anonymous user. We're logged in as a specific user. Now, if I have rights on the private registry, or if I have the collaborator access where I can pull and push, I can download the image. I can create that pod. Right? Good. Now this is the process for you to get authenticated with your registry is what we looked at right now. The challenge what we have is we have 100 nodes. 2-node cluster or 3-node cluster what I have. I can manually go log in into every node and I can say, okay, make use of this to authenticate. But when we talk about hundreds of nodes, that's not practical for us to go log in because we don't know where the pod is going to go. Right? It can go on node 1 or node 100 too. If I make use of a private repository, what's going to happen? That container runtime on that node needs to authenticate. What is the solution? The solution is here. There's a secret type called as Docker registry. So you can create or store your Docker config credentials. And what did happen? And when you want to pull an image from a private repository, you can specify this credentials and you can make use of a keyword called as image pull secret. And you can specify the secret name and it's going to kubelet will be passed on with that information. And it's going to make use of that to pull the image from your private repository. How do we do that? Well, we'll say I want to create a secret of Docker registry type. I'm going to ask for help again. It's going to tell you what you need to do. It says, listen, this is the usage. Give some name. Type is Docker registry and some name and username, your Docker user password, your email, your server details if you want to, right? Or you can type it out literally, or you can point me towards the Docker config JSON file. Whatever the contents of those files will be stored as sensitive information. Scroll up a little bit, tells you the example. Like you can create a secret this way, or you can say from file and refer to your config.json file, right? How Docker registry secret, you'll say from file Docker registry.config and path to that config.json file. It's going to work that way. Let's quickly create one secret. I'm going to quickly make use of this as an example. kubectl, explain me what is a secret. Tells you what is a secret and tells you what kind of fields you can have. Most of the fields, most of the top level resources of all the API objects, what we have seen so far, had your AKMS, right? API version, kind, metadata, and spec. Secrets don't have spec though. What they have is data, where you can specify key value and scroll up a little bit. It tells you what about it is. Holds data of certain type, bytes of value, field must be less than max secret byte, which is set to 1 MB. Belongs to the kind as secret, group as core, version v1. A little bit of, we know explain, we know describe, we know get. We're not going to go back to that. Want to see if there are any secrets? There is one. So what happens when you create a namespace? There is a service account which gets created with every namespace. And when a service account gets created, the token, the bearer token of that particular service account is created and is stored as service account token. When your pod needs to talk to a API server, it needs to authenticate. It makes use of this service account details to authenticate. Now, when we do a describe of a pod, we see something as a token mounted as a file system. We will get there. I'm just taking you there. All right. Good. So now I want to create a Docker config type of a secret. We're going to copy the same thing from here. Say, for example, I want to create a secret of type Docker registry. I will call it whatever I want. My credentials. My Docker username is Rohan, K21. And my password is password. Right? It said your credential secret type, the name my credential has been created. If you go back and do kubectl, can you show me what secrets we have in this namespace? It tells you have a Docker config JSON secret called as my credentials. And if I go back and maybe take a look at that right now, can you describe me the secret? Tells you there is some data. Does not reveal you what the data is. That's the sensitive information. It is masked from you. But if I really want to, since I am the cluster admin and I have the role-based access control to do whatever I want to do, I can also do an edit of this and I can look at that secret. So how do you prevent anybody else looking at these secrets is by making use of appropriate role-based access controls. Now we have created some secret. This secret contains my Docker configuration, basically my username and my password. Now I want to create a pod which pulls an image from my private repository. So how do we do? Well, we go back to our documentations and we say Kubernetes docs and we say image pull secret. Gotta choose the right version though. Scroll down, it tells you a lot of story out there. It also tells you when you create a pod manifest. So what do? Under your pod spec, you specify something extra right now. What? Called as image pull secret. In our case, It says registry credentials. What we created was my credentials. So when I create my pod spec, I will pass this on. What's going to happen? That secret is created, stored in my etcd. The API server, whichever kubelet scheduler is going to assign us to any node, on that node that kubelet needs that information, API server is going to pass on that information to that particular kubelet, and making use of that information, the container runtime on that node is going to go fetch that image for you. Now, irrespective of whichever node that pod goes, whichever node needs that information is made available at the runtime. That is what you make use of. One type of a secret called as Docker credentials, Docker registry type of secret. All right. So we know that this is not the correct credentials what I have. So I'm not going to show you as an example of a private repository. I have pointed to you what you need to do. You need to practice it. Of course, you need to, and you will create your own credentials. From the exam point of view as well, they don't expect you to, sign into some third-party registries, maybe Docker Hub or any other hub, and use your credentials. So in that way, I'm kind of safer is what I feel. I assume that they might not ask me this type of secret where I need to go outside Kubernetes. Okay, that's a subtle hint. But the point is, we should know how to create it, how to make use of. That is the use of it. Good. There were a couple of other types of secrets. Like what? There is a generic type of secret. What you can create. Good. What does that generic guy do? Any sensitive information, your password, your tokens, anything in the key value format or contents in your file, you want to be created as a secret. So you can make use of generic as a type. Then I don't know what I need to do. What will I do? Ask for help. There are two ways in which you can create your generic secret. One is you mention it from file. Create a generic secret with whatever name you want. Right? There's an option called as what type. And then the main important point, what I want you to make a note is either create it from a file or create it literally from literal key and value. There are two ways you can create it. One, whatever key and value I wanted. For example, if we go back to our Docker, where did that go? Did I close it? Now, for example, there was key and some value. The key was database connection password. The value was example here. Right? I can make use of from literal key and value. That's one way of creating a secret. Then either can I say from a file, the sensitive information what I have, the passwords what I have, the tokens or whatever I want to protect is in the file 1, 2, 3, 4. I've written it in the file. What will I do? I will say, why don't you make use of from this file? And I mention the source of it. Then what is going to happen? When you say from file, the file name, the base name of the file, when I say base name as in the file name without the extension, is going to act as the key. The contents of the file is going to act as the value. There are only two ways you can create. If we know both the ways, no matter whatever question they ask you, doesn't matter to us. Right? Good. So how do I create it? Of course, we have some examples right on top here. It tells you how to create from a file. This is how you do it from a file. And this is how you do it from literal. Let's look at this first. And let me copy it to a notepad. We'll make use of the same example. It's telling I'm going to create a secret, generic secret. Right? This is the name of my secret called as my secret. From literal key value. Key is here, key 1. Instead of key, the key is writing at key 1. I will say maybe username is called as DB admin. Okay. And another key and value, whatever you want to, password is what I call the key, and top secret @ 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. So when I created this as a secret, there are 2 keys and 2 values, which is created and stored in my etcd. Right? If I go back and can you describe me secret with whatever name you've created? It tells you there are 2 keys. There's a key called as username. There's a key called as password. It doesn't tell you what the content is. Right? That is because it is a secret.
So guys, this was our expert from team K21 Academy, and if in case you want to have a deeper dive and want to build a career in Kubernetes and Docker, including DevOps, then we have something really special for you. We have our free class on mastering Kubernetes, Docker and DevOps. that includes how to build in-demand skills and land a higher paying job. So for that, you just have to visit k21academy.com/K8S02. You have to click on book your free seat now. And after that, select an event date according to your availability. Enter your name, your email address, your phone number, and click on Yes, Save My Seat. Moving ahead, you'll be seeing this kind of interface. You just have to save this link on the extreme right, add it to your calendars, and I'll see you in the free class. Till then, take care and keep learning.